about the ability to adjust perception when circumstances require it. Persona does the opposite. It needs you to preserve the image, even when the situation has changed. When thinking serves persona, a familiar phenomenon appears. You begin to rationalize instead of question. Instead of asking, why does this make me uneasy? You quickly find reasons to justify silence, delay, or avoidance. Thinking becomes a tool of justification, no longer a tool of exploration. And because everything unfolds smoothly, appropriately, in character, you rarely realize how far you have drifted from your own honest center. Jung did not deny the value of persona. He understood that without this mask, people would struggle to exist in society. But he also emphasized that problems begin when persona occupies the entire space of consciousness. At that point, you are not only performing a role for others, you are performing it for yourself. You believe the story of who you are supposed to be so completely that you can no longer hear the subtle signals indicating that reality is asking for a different perspective. In difficult situations, think smart does not mean thinking in ways that offend no one, preserve appearances, or keep familiar roles intact. Think smart, for Jung, means the ability to recognize when your thinking has been pulled away from neutrality by social demands. It is the moment you dare to admit. This argument sounds very reasonable, but what is it serving? That single question is enough to strip persona of its absolute control. The paradox is that when you stop letting persona govern your thinking, you do not become less social. On the contrary, you become more authentic in your responses, clearer in your choices, and therefore more trustworthy in the long run. Calm now comes not from preserving an image, but from no longer having to constantly guard it. Inner space opens up, and within that space, thinking can perform its proper function, to understand, to distinguish, and to choose. This is also when people begin to notice a very subtle difference. Clarity does not come from having played the right role for many years, but from daring, for the first time, to see a situation without asking what it will do to one's image. Before closing this section, take a moment to look back at yourself. In recent difficult situations, have you ever noticed that you remain silent, aggrieved, or delayed, not because it was truly right, but because it helped preserve a familiar image? If so, you do not need to conclude or explain anything. Simply share in the comments a moment when you felt you saw it but didn't speak, or knew it but chose silence. Sometimes bringing that story into the light is already the first step toward more honest thinking. Number 13. Self, the higher center that guides essential decisions. When the mask has been seen and no longer unconsciously governs thinking, people often do not immediately find new answers. Instead, they enter a quieter, less dramatic state that nonetheless requires more courage. This is the space many rush to fill with action or explanation, because such silence is easily mistaken for passivity or retreat. Jung saw it not as disorientation, but as a sign that the psyche is beginning to reorganize around a different center. That center is not the ego, not a social role, but the self. In the Jungian model, the self is not an abstract philosophical idea, nor a higher ego in a moral sense. The self is the totality of the psyche, the deepest organizing principle that allows all other parts to find their proper place. If the ego is the center of consciousness, The self is the center of the entire psychological life, including both what has become conscious and what has not. Thus, when Jung speaks of the self as a centering force, he is not speaking of control, but of integration. At this level, functioning no longer takes the form of I decide, but of I am being placed back in alignment. Every element of the psyche, when not forced, naturally tends to arrange itself around this axis. This has a crucial implication for thinking in difficult situations. When a decision runs counter to the self, a person does not necessarily feel fear or suffering. On the contrary, they often still feel fine, still rational, still control. But beneath that inherent stability lies a constant irritation. Energy must be expended to sustain the choice. Reassurance must be repeated. The more reasons are needed to stand firm, the more it signals that the inner axis is misaligned. Over time, this tension erodes calm and turns thinking defensive and rigid. Conversely, when the direction does not oppose the self, it may not bring immediate certainty, but it does not require constant effort to endure. This is a very subtle criterion Jung regarded as a sign of essential alignment. I once heard the story of Rachel, a woman in her 30s living a life widely considered successful and reasonable. Rachel worked in education, held a stable position, was trusted by colleagues, and loved by students. For many years, she believed her path was clearly defined. Then, without any specific crisis, she began to notice that every decision involved moving forward along the familiar track felt heavy. She could still explain why she should continue, still found the arguments entirely reasonable, but each time she thought about committing more deeply to her own role, her inner world seemed to tighten in order to agree. Notably, Rachel did not fall into emotional crisis. She was not sad, panicked, or disoriented in the usual sense. She noticed only something small yet consistent. Whenever she thought in terms of what I should do, her thinking became rigid and exhausting. And whenever she allowed herself not to conclude, not to define the future prematurely, her body and mind softened. Rachel did not have new answers, but she had a clear signal about the degree of inner resistance. That signal gradually became a new point of reference for observation. In Jungian language, Rachel did not give up or go astray. She simply stopped resisting the centering pull of the self. The right decision in this case was not choosing a different option, but no longer forcing the psyche to maintain a form that no longer fit. The self did not tell Rachel what to do. It merely withdrew energy from old structures, making continuation difficult in a very precise way. And this precision is the expression of a deeper intelligence Jung believed existed beneath consciousness. Jung held that when people go against the self, the psyche creates obstacles, not as punishment, but to compel attention to the misaligned center. This may sound abstract, but modern science shows a clear parallel. Research on systemic coherence indicates that when individuals repeatedly make decisions that conflict with core values and deep identity, the nervous system expends more energy to maintain stability. Cortisol rises, regulatory capacity diminishes, thinking becomes defensive and less flexible. Conversely, when behavior aligns with inner orientation, the nervous system enters a high state of synchrony, not because problems are solved, but because the system is no longer fighting itself, allowing clarity and calm to arise without effort. This reframes stay calm, think smart, through the lens of the self. Calm is no longer understood as a skill of controlling reactions, but as a sign that you are not opposing yourself. Intelligent thinking is no longer about speed or sharp choices, but about discerning which thoughts arise from the need to observe all structures, and which can emerge when the cycle is no longer understood. When the self begins to occupy the center, thinking often slows down, yet becomes more precise and honest. This slowness is not stagnation. It is a rhythm appropriate to the depth of transformation underway. What must be emphasized here is this: the self never commands. It does not issue direct instructions or force action. The self reveals itself only through the degree of inner ease or resistance to a given direction. At this stage of the process, what is required is not a decision, but the ability to continue observing without prematurely closing the experience. This is not the end point, but a threshold, where thinking begins to learn how to stand behind a deeper center, rather than trying to lead with familiar patterns. At this threshold, people begin to learn a different kind of listening, not seeking answers, not forcing direction, but recognizing the very slow rhythm of psychological life adjusting itself. Thinking does not yet need to have the final word. It only needs to be quiet enough not to obstruct the deeper axis forming. At this stage, not knowing is no longer a deficiency, but a necessary condition for a new structure to emerge authentically. Number 14. Jungian synthesis. Calm as a consequence, not a goal. Only at a certain point, when people no longer have to strain against their own inner movements, does a new understanding gradually appear, not as a logical conclusion, but as an image that becomes clear only when one steps back far enough to see the point. Calm is not a skill to be trained, nor a state to be pursued. It arises naturally as a consequence when psychological life is no longer operating in tension and opposition. When thinking no longer has to fight unseen forces within, calm becomes evident, almost to the point of not needing to be held. Throughout this journey, Carl Jung never attempted to give people a formula for staying calm in difficult situations. He did something far subtler. He outlined the structure of psychological life as a living whole, where each element, once seen in its proper place, naturally reduces inner conflict. Parts once pushed into shadow, when recognized, no longer need to speak through impulsive reactions. Old patterns once observed gradually lose their power to silence inner thinking. Social roles, once return to their proper function, stop distorting decisions just to preserve a familiar image. And when a deeper axis of inner life begins to emerge, thinking naturally ceases to be pulled off course by structures that have completed their role. The core lies here. These movements do not occur in linear sequence, nor do they exist as stages to be completed. They interweave, overlap, and influence one another like elements in the ecosystem. Shift one point in the structure, and the entire system begins to respond differently. In that change, calm does not appear as an effort or personal achievement, but as a natural sign that psychological life is finding its balance again. Seen this way, think smart is also redefined. Intelligent thinking in difficult situations is not quick reaction, sharp argumentation, or rigid emotional control. It is the ability to think without being hijacked. When the shadow no longer needs to hide, when the complex is not blindly triggered, when the persona is not standing in front like a mirror that must not crack, and when the self occupies the center, thinking becomes clear on its own. It does not need to prove, justify, or rush to conclusions simply to escape discomfort. Imagine someone facing a difficult conversation, such as giving honest feedback to a loved one or colleague. When the psyche is still full of unseen conflict, such a conversation easily becomes a site of reaction, avoidance, defensiveness, or saying what is appropriate, but not inwardly true. The person may try to remain calm by choosing safe words and a steady tone, yet afterward feel drained, heavy, and constrained. By contrast, when inner structures have been reordered, the same conversation unfolds in a very different space. The person does not need to maintain calm. They speak more slowly, listen more clearly, and can adjust their words according to the real flow of the dialogue. Though the conversation remains difficult, they are not swept away by reaction. Calm here is not a strategy, but the result of no longer needing to defend oneself against oneself. This explains why Jung was always cautious of directed advice like stay calm, think positively, or control your emotions. For him, such advice touches only behavior on the surface, while the real issue lies in the deeper structure of the psyche. If the structure has not been adjusted, any technique is temporary. If the structure has been adjusted, calm does not need to be mentioned. It arises as a baseline state. When the entire Jungian process is synthesized, a clear reversal emerges compared to common approaches today. Instead of asking, how can I be calm? The core question becomes, what in me is preventing calm from appearing? Instead of trying to make better decisions under pressure, one learns to recognize the unseen forces distorting thinking before decisions form. And instead of treating calm as the final goal, one understands it as a signal that the inner system is operating harmoniously. At a deeper level, this also touches the essence of psychological maturity. A mature person is not someone who remains calm in every situation, but someone who is no longer surprised by their own reactions. They can recognize when the unconscious part is speaking, when the old pattern is trying to repeat, and when the social image is interfering with thinking. Because of this, they can pause before reaction becomes action, and allow thinking to return to its proper function, to understand, distinguish, and choose with clarity. If the entire spirit of staying calm, think smart, in Jung's sense, were to be condensed into a single statement, it would be this. Calm is the result of the absence of inner war, and intelligent thinking is the consequence of a psyche organized around its proper axis. There are no shortcuts here. No technique can replace the process of recognition, observation, and restructuring. And precisely for that reason, what is gained through this process is not temporary. At this closing point, what remains is not a call to action nor a checklist to follow. It is a different way of seeing yourself in difficult situations. When you notice that you are no longer swept into an excessive reaction, when thinking no longer has to prove its correctness, and when calm appears without effort, that is not right. It is a sign that the various parts of the psyche have begun to stand in their proper places. And when that happens, stay calm is no longer a command, and think smart is no longer a pressure. They become two natural expressions of the same inner reality, a person living and thinking from within their own integrity. Looking back on the entire journey that stay calm, think smart, the art of critical thinking, in difficult situations, Carl Jung has just guided you through, you may have noticed something essential. calm and clarity are not isolated skills to acquire, but the result of an inner order being restored. From recognizing unconscious reactions, distinguishing suppression from calm, clarifying the roles of ego, shadow, and persona, to encountering the self as a deeper axis of psychological life, you no longer stand at the same starting point as when this video began. Not because you know more, but because you now look differently at yourself. Jung did not teach you how to think faster under pressure, nor did he promise that difficult situations would disappear. What he showed is that most chaos does not come from circumstances, but from thinking being hijacked by unrecognized inner structures. When those structures are seen and reordered, calm does not require effort. It appears as a foundation, and upon that foundation, thinking becomes truly intelligent, not because it is sharper, but because it is no longer distorted. When you begin to live from that position, stay calm is no longer an instruction to follow, and think smart is no longer a pressure to perform. They become two natural expressions of the same thing, a psyche no longer at war with itself. You react more slowly, but more precisely. You speak less, but more truthfully. You no longer need to win with thinking, because you are no longer being possessed by thinking. If this video resonated with you, not as a new idea, but as a familiar recognition, share it with someone who may be caught between false calm and distorted thinking. And if you wish to continue this journey, the journey of learning to think from the right inner position, subscribe to accompany the videos ahead, because when inner order is restored, you will no longer have to strive to be calmer or smarter. You will live as the natural consequence of that order. And in the most difficult situations, that is something nothing can take away from you. This ego is not bad. It is trying to keep you safe. But when it holds the entire steering wheel, the deeper layers of the psyche, where intuition, creativity, and guidance live, step back. Manifesting, understood through will, cannot happen while the ego is driving the handle. It can only appear that the ego is calm enough to yield to a wider center, where a person no longer lives only to avoid mistakes, but to respond to life. Jung never denied that human beings live with fear. He understood that fear is a natural part of being human. The difference lies in whether fear is being listened to or being given authority. When fear becomes the final decision maker, the unconscious chooses silence. When fear is seen as a signal but no longer holds the center, the psychological atmosphere begins to change. And when that atmosphere changes, the unconscious begins to respond again, very softly. Not with dramatic signs, but with subtle movements, a lighter feeling in the body when you think of one direction, a sense of expansion when you imagine one choice, an impulse that no longer comes with panic. These signals do not appear to force you forward, but to remind you that life is still there inside, that you still have the capacity to answer life. Number 4. If you want to attain something, you must first stop forcing yourself. In the moment you begin to realize the unconscious is not silent because you did not try hard enough, but because you have lived too long in fear, another perspective starts to open. When forcing yourself forward is no longer the right path, you begin to sense that what is truly needed now is not more pushing, but a different kind of guidance, more subtle, coming from inner harmony rather than pain. You grow up in a system that glorifies forcing. Force yourself to try harder. Force yourself to be more disciplined. Force yourself to be strong. It seems every achievement must come with some degree of rigidity. But Jung viewed psychological development in a completely different way. He did not believe inner maturity comes from constantly pushing yourself beyond your limits of endurance. It comes from understanding the true rhythm of the human psyche. And within that rhythm, coercion does not create transformation, it creates resistance. Many people confuse effort with forcing. Effort comes from life within, and forcing comes from the fear of not being enough. When you force yourself, you tell the unconscious that who you are right now is not okay, and the unconscious responds by tightening. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But you cannot choose to become something else while you are denying yourself. I once witnessed the story of a woman I met in a meditation retreat. She came with a very clear goal. I want to heal. I want peace. I want to change my life. But from the first days, she was almost exhausted. She tried to meditate for a very long time, tried to keep her mind empty, tried not to think. Whenever her mind wandered, she blamed herself. Whenever emotion rose, she tried to press it down. On the surface, she did every exercise correctly. But inside, her body grew tenser, her breath more hurried, and her sense of failure heavy. Only when an instructor told her, "You don't need to be good at meditating. You only need to stop forcing yourself to meditate correctly," did things begin to change. She did not gain anything immediately. But something subtle happened. Her body softened, her breath slowed, tears appeared without a reason. Not because she forced healing, but because she stopped fighting herself, and from that point, real movement began. From a scientific angle, this is fully grounded. When you keep forcing yourself, the sympathetic nervous system stays activated. The body remains in must do, must achieve, must be right. In that state, the brain prioritizes survival over learning and instruction. By contrast, when the pressure decreases, the parasympathetic system activates, allowing the body to recover, process emotion, and integrate experience. In other words, coercion spends energy on surviving. Releasing coercion allows that energy to be used for transformation. Jung saw this not only biologically, but symbolically. He believed that when people try to become an ideal image through force, they move farther from the self, the deepest coordinating center of psychological life. Real development does not happen when you strive to become a better version. It happens when you are safe enough to be the person who is present. And only in that state can the unconscious cooperate, rather than resist. Forcing yourself also creates a familiar paradox. The more you force yourself, the more you feel you are not enough. The more you try to reach, the more you feel you are falling behind. Not because you are inadequate, but because coercion places you inside an inner war. One part wants to move forward, another part fears it cannot bear it. And in that war, energy is consumed not by action, but by conflict. Jung would say any growth that happens inside prolonged conflict is not sustainable, because it is not supported by the whole psyche. To attain something, therefore, does not begin by adding pressure, it begins by removing pressure. Not letting go of the goal, but letting go of how you treat yourself on to it. When you stop forcing, a different space begins. In that space, you do not need to prove, compare, or compete. And within that space, intuition begins to grow. Perception becomes clearer, and action becomes more natural. Jung did not promote passivity. He did not say you should sit still and wait. What he emphasized is the difference between action born from fear and action born from inner harmony. When you force yourself, action carries tension. When you stop forcing, action carries precision. Less, but truer. Slower, but more enduring. At a deeper level, stopping the force is also an act of trust. Trusting you do not need to be violent with yourself to deserve the good. Trusting life does not need to be coerced to move, and this trust is not vague. It is a specific physiological and psychological state in which the body is no longer in survival mode. And when that state appears, you will notice something very Jungian. Many things do not come because you pull them towards you. They come because you stop pushing yourself away from them. You do not have to become someone else. You only have to stop fighting who you are. The practical application of this part is not about being less. It is about noticing when you are forcing yourself. Maybe forcing yourself to move faster than you really, forcing yourself to be peaceful when you are ready, forcing yourself to be strong when your body is tired. Simply recognizing that moment of coercion and allowing yourself to pause for 1 minute already begins to change the inner operating direction. No need to fix it forever now. No need to get results immediately. Just stop adding more pressure. If this section touched you, leave a comment with the phrase, pause to move forward. Not to say it to others, but to remind yourself that you do not have to force yourself in order to deserve the good. But sometimes, the moment you allow yourself to slow down, soften, and oppose yourself less, is when life begins to move in the most natural and precise way. Number 5. When the conscious mind longs, but the unconscious resists. Right here, when you've stopped bracing or slowed down enough to feel, a familiar yet hard-to-name state becomes clear. You know what you want. Not a vague desire, but a specific direction you have thought through many times. Your conscious mind believes it is right, an opportunity to seize. Yet each time you approach it, you feel yourself shrink back. Not because you changed your mind, but because inside there is a very light yet persistent force pulling you back. Many people live in this state without realizing it. On the surface, they still talk about goals, dreams, and plans, but inside they hesitate, procrastinate, lose energy at the very moments they don't. Then they conclude they lack determination, discipline, or strength. Jung would call that a common misunderstanding. The issue is not wording. It is that the conscious and the unconscious are not on the same side. The conscious longs because it sees the future. It paints an image of what could be achieved, and believes that if it tries hard enough, everything will change. But the unconscious does not live in the future. It lives in what has been, in memory, in the body's recorded sense of safety or unsafety. When a conscious desire touches a sensitive unconscious region, the unconscious does not argue. It quietly resists. This resistance is not loud. It does not say, don't. It shows up in everyday ways. You procrastinate on something important, even though you know it is necessary. You feel tired knowing you are about to cross a new threshold. You doubt yourself, even though you are confident before. You create reasonable resistance to stop, and everything looks like unfavorable circumstances. But inside, some parts are not ready. The unconscious never opposes you without reason. It responds to what it senses as danger. Danger here is not necessarily failure. Sometimes success itself is a threat. Being seen, being recognized, stepping into a new event, and leaving the familiar, carrying greater responsibility, and facing the fear of being judged. If the unconscious does not feel you are safe enough to hold those consequences, it pulls the brake. A clear example can be seen in the story of Marie Curie, the first and to this day, the only woman to receive 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. Her conscious mind always longed to discover. She was powerfully drawn to science, to questions about the nature of matter and life. But that path was not easy. Marie Curie faced poverty, sexism, and isolation within the male-dominated scientific community at the time. For years, she worked in extremely harsh conditions, researching and doubting herself. There were periods when she slowed down, not because she lacked ability, but because the psychological load was too heavy. As a woman in the conservative scientific world, stepping into the light meant becoming a target of scrutiny. From a junior perspective, her unconscious carried the fear of exclusion and injury, while consciousness still longed to go farther. Only when Marie Curie fully accepted her path, no longer trying to clean herself by other people's standards, did the inner conflict soften. She no longer researched to be recognized, but because she could not live otherwise. And in that state, revolutionary contributions emerged. This was not the moment consciousness defeated the unconscious. It was the moment the two began to move in the same direction. No one once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. When the conscious mind longs and the unconscious resists, many people avoid that conflict by forcing harder or by quitting entirely. But both are ways of avoiding the fearful part within. And when that part is not listened to, it will keep pulling you back, no matter how hard you try. You can imagine the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious, like swimming against a current. You use a lot of strength, you get tired quickly, and you wonder why you cannot go far. Not because you are a bad swimmer, but because you have not seen the current. The unconscious is that water. It is not against your swimming. It simply shows that your direction needs adjustment. When the conscious and unconscious do not agree, your energy is split. One part wants to move forward, another part wants to hold back. And the prolonged exhaustion does not come from doing too much. It comes from constantly pulling yourself in 2 opposite directions. Jung believed there is no sustainable development built on prolonged inner conflict. What is subtle is that the unconscious does not demand you understand everything immediately. It only needs to be acknowledged. When you stop treating resistance as an enemy, it becomes a signal. Instead of blaming yourself, why am I like this? You become curious. What in me is wrong? This curiosity is not judgmental, it is listening. And in that space, the conflict starts to soften. As the two layers synchronize, your desire changes in quality. It no longer carries tension or coercion. Action no longer comes from the need to prove. You do not have to push yourself faster, yet you are no longer invisibly pulling backwards. Energy begins to flow in one direction, and what used to be difficult becomes possible in a more natural way. The practice in this phase is not about yourself to understand the unconscious. It is about changing how you approach resistance. Each time you notice you want something strongly, but then procrastinate or lose energy, pause for 1 beat and ask gently, which part of you does not feel safe with this? No need for an answer right away. No need to analyze deeply. Just let the question exist as an invitation. Then, notice the body. Where does the resistance show up? In the chest, the belly, the shoulders. Naming the specific sensation helps the unconscious recognize you're listening, not forcing. When listened to long enough, resistance often changes shape. It does not vanish immediately, but it no longer needs to fight. And when you do this enough times, your desire is no longer an order you must execute. It becomes a direction supported from within. Consciousness and the unconscious begin to move in the same rhythm. And it is in that state that what we long for can enter the mind flow sustainably forever. Number 6. Relaxation helps psychic energy stop sabotaging. Have you noticed that many times what exhausts you is not the work or the goal in front of you, but the rigid tension you carry while doing it? It is not that you lack energy, it is that your energy is being used to fight yourself. And when you see this, you begin to understand why relaxation is not a luxury. It is necessary. Many people think they are tired because they lack motivation or are not strong enough. In truth, most exhaustion comes from maintaining too high a level of control for too long. You work and you release yourself. You move forward and you monitor whether you are doing well. Energy is used not only for action, but to maintain an image, a standard, pace. When you must play too many things at once, you slowly run dry without noticing. In your nature, psychic energy is not something you can increase by forcing more. It is directly tied to how internally seamless you are. When you live under constant self-surveillance, a large part of your energy is locked into sustained attention. This does not create strength, it creates wear, and wear is quiet. It arrives as heaviness in the head, loss of interest, irritability, or simply fatigue with no clear cause. I met an old colleague again, after years without contact. In the past, he was the type everyone assumed was solid, hard-working, highly disciplined, rarely showing emotion. But up close, you could see him be almost never relaxed. After every achievement came a new target. After every step forward came a higher step. He did not allow himself to slow down, and he did not allow himself to be wrong. Even when things were going well, he held a guarded posture, as if the slightest loosening would make everything collapse. When we met again, I realized the change was not in his job title, but in how he sat, how he spoke, how he looked at the person in front of him. He no longer answered quickly to prove he understood. He listened more. His pace slowed, yet he was not anywhere to shake. Kelvin said there was a period when he was forced to stop because his body was depleted. Not because he wanted to change, but because he could no longer continue in the old way. During that time, he did not make a new self-optimization plan like before. He did not throw himself into a new training program. The only thing he did was allow himself not to meet the standard every day. At first, this made him very anxious. He feared that without pressure, he would decline. But what happened was different. When he no longer had to maintain the image of always being ready and strong, he had more energy for what truly mattered. His decisions became less rushed, his conversations became less tense, and his work results, strangely, became better. Kelvin Newton's change did not come from doing less. It came from no longer putting himself in a constant state. When you stop forcing yourself to maintain continuous tension, your inner system recalibrates. You do not lose motivation, you only lose the excess pressure. And when that layer falls away, what remains is often more essential, more stable. Being oneself, who looks outside, believes, who looks inside, awaits. When you focus only on external outcomes, you easily believe you need more effort. But when you look at the inner state that is operating, you may realize you are spending too much energy maintaining an image or avoiding errors. The awakening Jung speaks of is not a dramatic experience. It is simply the ability to see where you are pressuring yourself and the courage to loosen that place. Relaxation, in its deeper meaning, is not leaving life. It is changing how you are present in life. When you no longer have to prove your worth through every action, you work with a clearer focus. When you no longer have to watch every possibility, you can give your attention to what is happening right in front of you. This does not remove challenges, but it stops you from creating extra challenges by fighting yourself. So many people live as if they are gripping something invisible all day. The hand aches not because the object is too heavy, but because it's never released. Relaxation is the moment you can drop, not to drop what matters, but to stop hurting yourself. When you stop using energy to hold attention, that energy naturally becomes available for creativity, connection, and real presence. What matters here is not learning a specific technique. What matters is just soften your gaze. Allow yourself not to be perfect for 1 minute. Small things like this begin to change how energy moves inside you. And when energy is no longer used to pressure yourself, you do not need to force it to flow smoothly. You only need to stop making it heavy or rigid. Number 7. Are you attracted to peace or from desperation? And as you begin to see that relaxation helps your inner energy stop sabotaging itself, another question naturally arises in your mind, quietly but truthfully. Not what you want, but what state you are in when that wanting is sent out. Because for you do not attract life through surface words or thoughts. You attract through the underlying psychological state you live with each day. Many people believe they are manifesting never. But if you look closely, that hope often comes with a sense of urgency. It does not stand firm. It needs constant reassurance. It feels disappointment. And the hope has to be held so tightly. What may be operating underneath is not hope, but desperation wearing a positive mask. Jung did not use desperation as military, but as a psychological term, prolonged lack of safety, where a person feels they need something outside themselves in order to stand steady inside. When you desire for desperation, that desire carries pressure. It is not an opening, it is a rope that pulls. You pull life toward you in fear of loss, fear of lack, fear of being too late. And by pulling like that, you send a very clear message into the unconscious. I am not okay that this does not happen. The unconscious hears that message clearly, and its job is not to give you what you want, it is to protect you from threat. So it responds by keeping you in waiting, tension, and money. Jung believed the unconscious is always loyal to the baseline state. When the baseline is peace, the unconscious does not need to defend, it allows life to open. When the baseline is desperation, the unconscious contracts, system is operating as if everything is in danger. The story in the Bible illustrates this difference vividly. When Peter walks on water, when he steps out of the boat and keeps his gaze on Jesus, he can walk on the waves without sinking. Not because the sea is calm, not because he has special strength, but because inside him is total trust. But the moment Peter looks down into deep water, he feels the strong wind of life. Fear rises. He panics, and immediately he sinks. What is striking is that the outer circumstance does not change until that experience. When he begins to it is not the sea that makes him sink, but it is fear replacing peace. Through the Jungian lens, this is not a story of supernatural magic, but a precise psychological metaphor. When Peter walks in trust, his psychic energy is unified and vivid. When fear takes control, that energy contracts and betrays him. He does not lose ability. He loses connection to the state he's in. What changes is not whether he deserves it, but that he leaves peace and falls into desperation. And that shift in state determines whether he stands or sinks. What is subtle is that desperation is rarely recognized accurately. It disguises itself skillfully. It can look like effort, determination, and refusal to give up. But underneath it always carries one repeating question. If I don't have this, what will happen to me? When you see goodness, lack, or insecurity repeating in your relationships or circumstances, that is not the fault of others,